Almost exactly 2 years ago, I sat on this very dais for my first hearing as chairman of the subcommittee. It focused on a little-known board in the executive branch that ensures our civil service is vested with knowledge and expertise. That board is the Merit Systems Protection Board. At the time, the board had been without a quorum since January of 2017, the longest ever it's been unable to operate since it was created in 1979. Despite our efforts to highlight the significant role of the board in adjudicating federal employee appeals of actions taken against them when they blow the whistle on waste, fraud, and abuse, and political retaliation, the board still remains without a single board member confirmed by the U.S. Senate. It has a backlog of more than 3,000 petitions from employees who claim they've been retaliated against or that their leadership has failed to uphold the merit system principles that serve as the foundation of civil service since 1883. This hearing serves as a critical inflection point. The end of the Trump administration's 4-year assault on the federal workforce and a celebration of the resiliency of those who served our nation despite the constant attacks and degradation. It's also the beginning of a new administration that's highlighted the vital role federal employees play and will play in making the nation work, especially during a pandemic. We will use what we learned here today to better understand weaknesses in the federal laws that are meant to enshrine merit system principles in perpetuity. We seek to protect the statutory right to collectively bargain. We want to strengthen whistleblower protections to empower those who see wrongdoing to be able to come forward without fear. We want to prioritize the health and safety of the workforce that continue to serve us in the midst of a catastrophic and deadly pandemic, noting that we reached a tragic milestone yesterday that 500,000 fellow Americans have succumbed to this virus in less than a year. The Trump administration began its attacks on the federal workforce from the very start with a hiring freeze. President Trump quickly followed that freeze with repeated budget requests to freeze federal pay. Congress did not agree. It provided at least a 1% increase in each year of the Trump administration in terms of compensation for federal employees. President Trump followed up pay freezes with 3 executive orders that severely undermined federal employees' rights to bargain collectively. He nominated 2 individuals who were outright hostile to public sector unions at the helm of the Federal Labor Relations Authority and stacked the Federal Services Impasse panel with anti-union stalwarts. The Trump administration also orchestrated an illegal attempt to abolish the very agency that serves as our nation's human resources hub. Without legal justification or analysis, the Trump administration began to move components of the Office of Personnel Management into the General Services Administration and the Executive Office of the President. This subcommittee held 2 hearings and sent multiple oversight letters on a bipartisan basis. Congress rejected and defeated the plan to eliminate OPM. This subcommittee led that effort on a bipartisan basis. Then the Trump administration went even lower. The President released an executive order that asked federal agencies to strip anyone who could be construed as involved with policymaking or policy implementation of the statutory due process rights. This action, known as Schedule F, struck at the very heart of what makes our civil service a crown jewel everywhere in the world. OPM, the Merit System Protection Board, and the FLRA, established collectively as statute by the Civil Service Act of 1978, are fundamental components to avoid the corrupt patronage system of our nation's past. And the Trump administration unleashed an all-out assault on those very foundations. I led my colleagues in running the clock out on the so-called Schedule F initiative, but damage remains. Clearly, we have a lot of work ahead of us to rebuild our civil service. I'm supporting the Biden administration's laudable effort to reverse many of the previous administration's actions by taking essential steps to revitalize our civil service. First, today, I'm introducing the Merit System Protection Board Empowerment Act, authorizing the board through 2026 and providing it authority to survey federal employees to find ways to improve its ability to protect expertise in government. Today, I'm also reintroducing the National Security, Diversity, and Inclusion Workforce Act, which requires each national security agency to provide a public report on its diversity and inclusion efforts and encourages agencies to expand development and career advancement opportunities for everybody in its workforce. Over the past few weeks, I've reintroduced legislation to prevent any future administration from attempting something like Schedule F from happening again without congressional approval. The Bipartisan Preventing a Patronage System Act requires the executive branch to get explicit statutory authority to establish any categories of federal employee outside of the general schedule. I believe that's perfectly consistent with American history. The Pendleton Act was a legislative act by Congress creating a professional cadre in the civil service, and to create by executive order a new schedule that actually undermines that, I think perverts the very basis of the action taken by Congress back in 1883. While we overturn the catastrophic policies of the previous era and nourish a federal workforce starved of resources, we must simultaneously find ways to rebuild our civil service and attract the next generation to public service. As of December, only 6.8% of the federal workforce was under the age of 30. In the private sector, by contrast, 23% of the workforce is under 30. According to OPM data from just last week, 29.4%, or nearly a third, of the federal workforce is eligible for retirement by the end of 2025. We have an aging workforce, and young people aren't attracted to it and don't want to stay if they are. In terms of diversity, the workforce needs improvement. While women comprise 43.3% of the full-time career workforce, they comprise only 35.5% of the senior executive service, the leadership ranks of our career workforce. People of color comprise 38.3% of our workforce, but only 22.6% of our senior executive service. You can see the visual on the screen. I want to show you an analysis of Georgetown University that uses OPM data to show the net loss of people of color across several agencies within the federal government during the last administration. If you look at the screen, you'll see that the green line represents an exodus of Black African-American employees from the Social Security Administration, the Bureau of Prisons, and OPM. Note, too, that people of American Indian descent or Alaskan natives left the Bureau of Indian Affairs in large numbers during the previous administration. It's a picture of an aging workforce that's failing to hire, welcome, and promote young people, women, and people of color. Strategic human capital management has been on the GAO high-risk list presented to this committee every year since 2001. We're in the midst of record job losses across the nation. Now's the time to recruit the best and brightest to federal service. And while we're at it, let's also find ways to reduce the 98.3 days on average it takes to hire a new employee in the federal government. We can and must do better. I'm here to help get the right talent into the right seats to solve the country's most pressing and intractable problems. And I look forward to hearing from the expert panel we have on how best we can get that done.